Today on BRStv Investigates, can you spend half the cost on a UPS battery backup and get equal or better performance than the larger, heavier, and more expensive options? I can tell you that for me, if the cheapest option is the best, I don't want to be left in the dark. So with that in mind, we ran one final battery backup test in order to find out, and today we'll compile the results to find out how to choose the right tool for the right job. And by the end of the video, you'll have some solid insight into selecting the right UPS backup for your pumps. Hi, I'm Randy with this Friday's BRStv Investigates, where we put popular reefing gear, theories, and methods to the test by experimenting on our own tanks so you don't have to experiment on yours. And in today's experiment, we test 3 of the cheapest UPS backups we could find from the same reputable UPS manufacturer that we used in previous tests, and then combine those results with experiments we've already done in order to get a wider and more clearer picture on which options are the best and how to help identify the best options for your tank. I have to be honest, I really couldn't have expected that BRStv Investigates would have me running around to various computer and electronic stores searching for UPS battery backup options to experiment on. But when I think about it, these non-aquarium intended backup solutions are probably some of the most popular methods that thousands of reefers choose to protect their pets and investment during a power outage. And hopefully through these tests, we can hone in for the community which options get you the most bang for your buck. So with that, let's dive into today's experiment results and answer the question, what's more important when choosing a UPS battery backup to get your tank through a power outage? Battery size or inverter size? In order to test today's question, we conducted a similar experiment to our last 2 experiments, only this time we went with 3 of the least expensive CyberPower options we could find with lower inverter sizes, with the CyberPower SX950, which cost us around $80 and utilizes a 510 watt inverter and a 7.2 amp hour battery. The next size down we chose was the CyberPower SX650 for around $50. That has a 360 watt inverter and a 5.5 amp hour battery. And lastly, we picked up the CyberPower SE450 for $40 with a 260 watt inverter and a 2.9 amp hour battery. We also opted to run today's experiment with more economically priced AC power heads using the 7 watt Tunze NanoStream 6045s. Today's data should go pretty quickly, but afterwards, let's unpack all of the results that we've seen throughout the entire testing series and see if we can draw some more informed conclusions on which options are going to be the best fit for backing up your tank and specific situation during a total power failure. With that, our test begins with the UPS backups fully charged and Tunze power heads pushing water towards the front of the glass, where from left to right we have the larger SX950, SX650 in the middle, and SE450 on the right. We should be able to see each power head shut down and stop pushing water as each battery backup becomes exhausted and fails. And to help ID when that happens, I've also tied a small string to each of the pumps. After 2 hours into the test, all 3 pumps are still pushing water. However, at 2 hours and 22 minutes, the smallest UPS of the bunch runs out of juice and the corresponding pump stops. Surprisingly, almost 1.5 hours later, at 3 hours and 58 minutes, the larger 510 watt UPS fails, leaving the middle of the road 360 watt battery backup as the last remaining pump still pushing water. However, the last battery backup also comes to a close shortly after, reaching only 5 hours and 2 minutes of total runtime. Interestingly enough, and opposite of our hypothesis, we sought out UPS battery backups with smaller inverters and inherently smaller associated costs, and we found shorter run times than much larger UPS backups we've previously tested. So what does that mean for those of us trying to decide on which one's best to protect our tanks? Well, let's take a quick look at the data we gathered in 2 separate comparisons, since there's obviously some major differences between the larger, heavier UPS batteries versus the smaller, less costly ones. Again, our original hypothesis was that the inverter size played a significant role in how efficiently our battery backups operated, specifically in our case, when using them at a far less wattage than what they're rated for. Looking at this inverter efficiency chart that we found from Penn State University, we see how quickly inverter efficiency can drop when the output power is underutilized. In this case, they show at a 5% output power, you can see about 80% efficiency, But how does that relate to an aquarium pump and UPS backup? Because we're using them way outside of their intended use at 0.5% to 2% of their intended operating range. We opened each of the UPS backups to take a look at the batteries and made some calculations based on the data we gathered in order to get an idea of how efficiency played a role, as well as total runtime compared to battery size. Starting with the two larger CyberPower UPS backups we tested, we see that there are 2 batteries in each one, giving the 1500 AVR a total of 18 amp hours with a 900 watt inverter, whereas the 900 AVR utilizes 2 7 amp hour batteries for a total of 14 amp hours with a 560 watt inverter. So with only a 5 watt pump drawing power from these batteries and larger inverter sizes, we see that we actually wind up utilizing less than 1% of the total inverter capacity. And if we compare that to the chart we just saw from Penn State, the efficiency percentage of that low of a power output doesn't even make it onto the graph. Meaning for our applications in the aquarium, we are using these UPS backups well outside of their intended purpose. More importantly than inverter size and output usage, looking at the total runtime in minutes for each of these, with 458 minutes for the 1500 AVR and at 22% less amp hour battery capacity, 782 minutes for the 900 AVR, it would seem that efficiency did play some sort of role here, because significantly smaller battery capacity of the 900 AVR actually ran almost 2 times as long. But it's hard to say with 100% certainty that that was the case here, and there may be some other factors at play. However, my main focus for this data is the calculation for runtime per amp hour of battery capacity, where we see that the larger inverter on the 1500 yielded almost 27 minutes per amp hour, whereas the 900 AVR with its smaller inverter yielded about 56 minutes per amp hour, or 107% longer runtime. Looking at the same comparison for the 3 smaller UPS backups we tested, we see somewhat similar results where the middle-sized backup, the SX650, actually performed the best, which is consistent with the 2 larger UPS backups when compared to the SX950. However, the smaller SE450 performed the worst despite its much smaller inverter size and the higher output usage percentage. But I believe that the direct causation of this performance was absolutely related to battery size, where the 2.9 amp hour battery inside the SE450 is almost 50% smaller than the SX650 and almost 60% smaller than the SX950, so reasonably we should expect it to run far shorter than the others. Alright, so what does this all mean for you and your tank? And what's more important when choosing a UPS battery backup? Battery size or inverter size? There's no question that battery size has an impact to performance. The 2 larger UPS with dual batteries lasted 3 to 6 times longer than our smallest battery UPS, and 1.5 to 3 times as long as the highest amp hour single battery option. For sure, battery size matters. So if you can't open one up right then and there in the store, heavier usually means more batteries and more battery capacity, and might possibly be the #1 factor to choosing the right UPS for your tank. However, supportive of that is the operating efficiency of the UPS's inverter. Although we didn't come out with super clear advice and guidance on how to identify the right inverter, I do believe that the closer you are to their intended operating range, the better it will perform. Meaning when I seek out a UPS for my own tank, I'll likely look for the highest battery capacity that I can find with the lower wattage operating range, such as the 900 AVR that we tested that provided upwards of 13 hours of runtime for a 5 watt pump, which will likely cover 80% of the issues I'll run into and give me a chance to do something about them, and definitely get me through a full workday or while I'm sleeping. Based on the range of options that we tested, there were absolutely 2 clear winners where for about $110, I got 13 hours of runtime with that same 900 AVR, and of course, the Ecotech DC battery backup and pump that lasted 6 times longer than that, where we saw 80 plus hours of runtime, where I get a full 3 days or more of backup solution. Actually, when I opened the Ecotech battery backup, I found a single 18 amp hour battery, which when compared to the $180 1500 AVR UPS with similar capacity, really drives home the efficiency of using a DC-powered pump with a DC-powered backup solution as sort of the gold standard for surviving longer-term power outages. Yet there are multiple ways we can ensure our tank survives the occasional power outage, and you can check all of them out in this power outage protection playlist right here.